The government spent $55,000 per unit to build tiny homes for homeless people in San Jose, California. 80 square feet, a bed, a desk, and 2 particle board shelves, but no kitchen and no bathroom. 900 miles north, a group of high school students is building the same thing for $2,500 in materials, insulated walls, a heater, electricity, and a locking door. So how are teenagers with zero professional experience outbuilding the government at a fraction of the cost? The homelessness crisis in America is not a problem you can avoid by driving a different route to work. The latest federal count found over 771,000 people experiencing homelessness on a single night in 2024. That is the highest number ever recorded in this country. Tent encampments lining freeway off-ramps in every major city, families sleeping in cars, veterans who served overseas now living under highway bridges. The federal government directs more than $10 billion a year toward homelessness assistance. California alone burned through an estimated $24 billion over 5 years on housing and homelessness programs, and the numbers kept going up. When a state auditor finally investigated where all that money went, the report found a data desert. Nearly a third of people who left state-funded placements ended up at unknown destinations. Nobody tracked whether the spending actually worked. That is the backdrop. Billions spent, rising numbers, and almost no accountability. In 2023, the governor of California stood behind a podium and announced that the state would build 1,200 tiny homes to address the crisis. He wanted them ready by summer. That summer came and went. Then the next summer, and as of the latest reports, the state was still selecting vendors to build them. And into that gap walked a bunch of teenagers with hammers, safety goggles, and absolutely zero interest in waiting for a government contract to get approved. At Sedro-Woolley High School in Washington State, instructor Daniel Caldwell runs a construction class where students build tiny homes from the ground up. The school partners with the Low Income Housing Institute, one of the largest tiny home village operators in the country. The arrangement is simple. Lowe's donates the building materials and drops them off at the school. The students build the houses. When they finish, the Low Income Housing Institute picks them up, delivers them to villages in and around Seattle, and puts homeless individuals and families inside. Caldwell's class builds 4 tiny homes per year. Each one is roughly 8 feet by 12 feet, about the size of a small bedroom. They have insulated walls, vinyl flooring, overhead lighting, electrical outlets, a heater, and a smoke detector. They are not mansions, but they are safe, dry, warm, and lockable. And when you compare that to sleeping in a soaking wet tent on a sidewalk in January, with freezing rain coming through whatever blankets you manage to keep, the difference is not minor. It is the difference between surviving and not. The Low Income Housing Institute puts it plainly on their website. Tiny houses are safe, weatherproof, and lockable. They allow people to reclaim their dignity and get on a path to permanent housing, employment, and connection to supportive services. A locking door sounds like a small thing until you have spent months sleeping in a place where anyone can walk up to you at any hour of the night. But here is the detail that everyone missed. Forget the feel-good angle for a second. The students at Sedro-Woolley are learning real construction skills, framing walls, laying flooring, roofing, and finished carpentry. Senior Kylan Chance, one of 2 girls in the program, talked about learning hand planes and handheld saws. She said the instructors trust her with finishing work because she has a steadier hand than some of the boys. These students are building transferable job skills while creating something that will become another person's home. Now, 4 homes a year is a meaningful contribution, but it is a drop in the ocean when 771,000 people have nowhere to sleep tonight. So what happens when you try to scale this up? Down in Lane County, Oregon, 15 high school woodworking classes joined forces on a project called Constructing a Brighter Future. Their goal was to build 30 transitional housing units before the end of the school term. 30. That is more than some government programs produce in 3 years. Each unit measured 8 by 16 feet, built using donated materials from a local nonprofit. One student named Akuma said he was surprised a school program could actually accomplish something like this. Another student, Weeby, said it feels a lot better than just being angry and frustrated about the problem, and that comment matters. These students are channeling the frustration that an entire generation feels about problems that seem impossible to fix into something real and physical and useful. They are not writing letters to Congress. They are not signing petitions online. They are picking up hammers and building the answer themselves. But building the structures is only half the equation. Getting them placed into communities where they actually change lives is the other half. And that is what makes the Denver program different. Students at the Cherry Creek Innovation Campus built 5 tiny homes for the Colorado Village Collaborative. Those homes went directly to Beloved Community Village, a tiny home community in northeast Denver that has helped dozens of chronically homeless people transition into permanent housing since 2017. It was Denver's first legal community of tiny homes, and it proved that the model could work inside city limits with zoning approval without costing taxpayers a fortune. The program coordinator, Mike DeGitis, explained that students take this project more seriously than any other practice building class because they know it will actually become someone's home. Around 100 students worked on just 2 of those homes. They read blueprints, they operated forklifts, they did electrical wiring, and when they finished, those homes joined an existing community with support services already in place. One student named Ben Maki said he thought it was incredible that they were learning and doing something that mattered at the same time. And then there is the version of this story that hits the hardest. In San Diego, the Warrior Village Project partnered with construction students from 5 different high schools to build 6 tiny homes specifically for homeless veterans, men and women who deployed overseas, who served in places most Americans could not find on a map, came home and ended up sleeping outside. The government that sent them there could not figure out how to get them a roof. So high schoolers stepped in. Student Jorge Hernandez said it was the first really big project they had worked on, way beyond the sheds and small builds from class. Another student, Juan Torres, said it felt like building good karma. 4 of those 6 tiny homes went directly to nonprofits, housing veterans who had served their country and ended up with nowhere to sleep. The project coordinator, Art Pilcher, summed it up perfectly. He said there is an affordable housing problem and a need for students to go into the trades, and putting those 2 things together is the obvious move. What comes next is the part that still does not make sense. Look at what is happening in these classrooms. Teenagers, many of whom have never held a power tool before, are producing habitable structures in a matter of weeks. The materials cost somewhere between $2,500 and $4,500 per home. The labor is free because students are learning, not billing. The supply chain is direct. Materials arrive at the school, students build the house, the finished house gets picked up. The students skip the permitting maze, the design consultants, the project labor agreements, and the 3-year delays between announcement and completion. Compare that to what happens when government takes the lead. In San Jose, the city completed 40 tiny houses at a cost of $2.2 million. That works out to about $55,000 per unit for an 80-square-foot structure with a single bed, a desk, a chair, and 2 particle board shelves, but no bathroom and no kitchen. The out-of-the-box cost for each prefabricated unit was about $6,500. Habitat for Humanity volunteered the labor to assemble them. So where did the other $48,500 per unit go? When you break that down per square foot, some of these government-built shelters run around $700 per square foot. For context, that is more expensive per square foot than a luxury estate in Beverly Hills. You are reading that correctly. A prefabricated shed with a cot in it, built on government money, costs more per square foot than a mansion with a pool and a guest house in one of the most expensive zip codes in the world. When a housing developer was shown the budget breakdown for one California project, he called it out of control and unacceptable. And this is a man who builds low-income housing for a living. In Los Angeles, the average construction cost per apartment under Proposition HHH, a bond measure specifically passed to build housing for the homeless, exceeded $531,000 per unit. That is more than the average market value of an LA condominium. The city was literally spending more to build homeless housing than people pay for market-rate condos. And when a researcher compared the per square foot cost of the San Jose tiny homes to national construction averages, the numbers were staggering. The tiny home cost exceeded the national average for a regular single-family home by a factor of 19. You could build a full-sized house in most of the country for less per square foot than what San Jose paid for a prefabricated shed without plumbing, and the delays matched the costs. Governor Newsom announced 1,200 tiny homes in March 2023. He wanted them ready by that summer. None were ready that summer. None were ready by summer 2024. The state was still selecting vendors as of late 2023. Meanwhile, Daniel Caldwell's students in Sedro-Woolley were cranking out 4 homes a year, every year, with donated Lowe's materials and the hands of teenagers. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, real solutions to real problems that nobody else is talking about. By 2024, LIHI was operating 18 tiny house villages across Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, and surrounding areas. Over 2,000 people a year were being sheltered through the program, and the construction model had not changed since it started back in 2015. Volunteers, students, church groups, Rotary clubs, and community organizations building tiny homes at an average materials cost of about $4,500 per unit. Hundreds of those homes were built and donated by groups exactly like the students at Sedro-Woolley. The outcomes are real. Residents in these villages have access to case managers, shared kitchen and bathroom facilities, laundry, and on-site counseling. People transition from the villages into permanent housing. They find employment. The villages run on community participation, daily neighborhood litter patrols, and self-governance. The entire model is built on one idea: give someone a safe, dignified place to sleep, and that becomes the first step toward rebuilding their life. But even the tiny home movement, as fast and efficient as it has become, cannot keep pace with the full scale of this crisis. Over 274,000 people were counted sleeping unsheltered on a single night in 2024. And every winter, the biggest killer on the streets is not violence. It is exposure, cold, wind, and rain that never stops. Hypothermia sets in within hours when someone is sleeping outside without protection, and children lose body heat 4 times faster than adults. That is actually why outreach workers in these communities have started carrying emergency thermal gear for nights when shelters hit capacity and there is nothing else available. One option that keeps coming up is TerraShell, a thermal bivvy made from thick aluminized material that reflects your body heat back to you. You climb in and it creates a warm pocket around your body, even in freezing conditions. It blocks wind, repels moisture, and weighs almost nothing. Small enough to hand out, and it can keep someone alive through a cold night when there is simply no room left indoors. Link for that is below if you want one. But the broader point holds. Whether it is a tiny home or a thermal bivvy, the solutions that actually reach people tend to be simple, affordable, and built by people who care. So, if students can build a functional tiny home for $2,500, why is the government spending $55,000 or $175,000 or even $531,000 on the same basic idea? The answer is everything that gets layered on top of the actual building. Project labor agreements. These are collective bargaining deals between trade unions and contractors required on almost all government construction projects. One developer told researchers that costs on a recent LA project with a PLA ran about 50% higher than projects without one. That is not the materials costing more. That is not the building being more complex. That is purely compliance with union work rules and administrative overhead. Then there are design fees. One California tiny home project had $1.3 million budgeted just for design. For tiny homes, prefabricated structures that come in a kit, it is hard to understand what kind of design. Innovation requires $1 million for a shed with a bed in it, and then there is permitting, environmental reviews, community impact studies, legal consultations, insurance, and administrative overhead. A project that a student can start and finish in 6 weeks takes a government agency 6 months just to approve. By the time the first nail gets hammered on a government tiny home site, the students in Sedro-Woolley have already built 2 more houses and shipped them to villages where people are sleeping in them tonight. Every layer of approval adds cost, adds time, and moves the project further away from the person sleeping on the ground who just needs 4 walls and a door. The students bypass all of this, not because they are cutting corners on safety, but because the model is fundamentally different. Donated materials plus volunteer labor plus a direct pipeline to a nonprofit operator equals fast, cheap, dignified shelter. The same shelter that a government process turns into a 3-year, 6-figure project, students are producing in weeks for the cost of a used laptop, and the proof that this approach works at scale already exists. Community First Village in Austin, Texas, built one of the most successful tiny home communities in the country by focusing on relationships and dignity instead of bureaucratic process. They have over 500 residents. People who were chronically homeless for years are now living in community, holding jobs, and rebuilding their lives. The village runs on a simple principle: give people a stable home first, then help them figure out everything else. And it works. It does not require a billion-dollar budget line to make it happen. It requires donated land, volunteer builders, and a willingness to skip the 14 layers of administrative overhead that government insists on attaching to every project. And this connects to something bigger that deserves attention. These programs are reviving trade education at a time when schools have been cutting shop classes for decades. Sarah Smith, the program director at Sawhorse Revolution in Seattle, pointed out that most schools do not offer shop classes anymore. The students who volunteer to build tiny homes are filling a gap that the education system created. The students know it too. Every wall they frame teaches them something a textbook never could. They can create something real, something tangible, something that matters to another human being. There is sawdust in the air, the sound of nail guns, and the weight of knowing that the thing you are building is going to keep someone warm and alive. Rebecca Job, a student in Utah who helped build homes for the Other Side Village in Salt Lake City, said it is definitely something that is needed, and she is right. The Other Side Village plans to house around 600 people coming out of chronic homelessness. High school students are building the homes to make that happen, not developers, not government contractors. This movement is teaching a generation something that no standardized test can measure: that a circular saw and a blueprint and a willingness to show up on a Saturday morning can accomplish more than a decade of committee meetings. That the distance between a person sleeping on concrete and a person sleeping in a warm, dry, lockable room might be as small as $2,500 and a group of teenagers who give a damn. The real question is not whether these programs work. They obviously do. The real question is why the model that costs $2,500 is treated as a side project, while the model that costs $531,000 is treated as the serious one. These students did not set out to embarrass the government. They set out to learn construction skills and help their communities. But the contrast they created between what is possible when you strip away the bureaucracy and what happens when you pile it on might be the most important lesson any classroom in this country is teaching right now. And this story keeps growing. Every week, volunteers across the country are picking up hammers and building something that someone else will call home. If you want to see what happened when one community tried to solve its own water crisis without waiting for government help, that video is on screen now. Click it